Every gardener has had this moment. You peel back the top of an old neglected compost heap, the kind you meant to turn weeks ago but never did, and suddenly the whole bottom layer writhes with worms. Not a few, not a handful, but a full-blown gathering that looks like the entire worm population in your backyard decided to move in. It's unsettling the first time you see it, but it's also a massive clue. These worms weren't attracted by luck or random chance. They were drawn by a very specific set of conditions that unturned compost creates far better than a compost pile that's constantly mixed, aerated and fussed over. This discovery has changed the way seasoned farmers handle organic waste. And once you understand why worms choose an untouched pile, you'll never manage compost the same way again. The first key to understanding worm swarms is recognizing what unturned compost does that turned piles cannot. Turning compost forces oxygen deep into the pile, which accelerates the hot thermophilic phase. While this is great for rapid breakdown, it's terrible for worms. High heat drives them away instantly. Worms prefer cool, stable environments, and a pile that's turned often never settles into that calm stage long enough for them to move in. But an unturned compost pile does something different. It heats once, cools slowly, and then stabilizes into a long, steady state where organic matter breaks down without dramatic temperature swings. This steady, cool environment creates the perfect setting for worms to feed, breed, and, well, concentrate in numbers you'll rarely see anywhere else. The bottom layers of an untouched pile gradually soften and moisten. Food scraps dissolve into a half-finished slurry that's just rich in bacteria. Fungal networks begin weaving through the material. All of this forms a buffet tailored exactly to the natural diet of earthworms. Once they find it, they stay, not for minutes or hours, but for weeks. Worms swarm these piles because untouched compost allows nature's decomposition ladder to form. The decomposition ladder is, well, a simple but powerful concept. Microbes start the work, then fungi follow, small arthropods appear, and finally worms move in last, feeding on the microbial bodies rather than the scraps themselves. When you turn a pile too often, you disrupt this sequence. Each turn breaks fungal threads, scatters the microbe colonies, and honestly wipes out the slow, steady habitat worms need. Unturned piles, on the other hand, allow the ladder to, fully develop from the bottom up. That's why the swarm gathers at the foundation, because it's where the system is most mature. The presence of worms isn't random. It's a sign that the pile has reached the final humus-forming phase of decomposition. When you see worms gathering in numbers, it means your compost is no longer just breaking down. It's transforming into soil. The most important lesson here is that worms will do the turning for you if you just stop turning the pile yourself. This single shift, doing less instead of more, can, really transform your entire composting approach. Worms aerate the pile with their tunnels, and they pull decaying material downward. Their castings elevate the nutrient profile faster than any human-managed compost turn ever could. When a pile reaches peak worm activity, it becomes a living engine that processes organic waste with, honestly, astonishing efficiency. So, to apply this in your own composting, the goal is not to build worm bins or force worms into your piles artificially. Instead, the goal is to create the kind of environment that makes them arrive on their own. What you want to do is start by building the pile in layers and let it heat naturally. After the first heat cycle, usually a week or two, stop disturbing it. Allow moisture to remain consistent but never saturating. The pile should feel like a wrung-out sponge when you squeeze a handful. This moisture balance is honestly crucial. Too dry and worms stay away. Too wet and the pile turns anaerobic, which repels them just as strongly. The bottom layer of the pile is where the real transformation happens once worms take over. When worms swarm an unturned pile, they create a soft, black, finely textured layer at the base that looks and smells like forest soil. They produce castings, break down tough fibres, and blend materials in ways no tool can replicate. This base layer can be harvested gradually with minimal disruption. One practical method is to remove compost from the bottom using a small trenching shovel. Every time you remove some, the worms retreat slightly upward into the layers that haven't been disturbed. Over time, an untouched pile becomes a vertical compost column, where each layer represents a different stage of decomposition, with the finished humus always at the bottom. Another approach is to shift the pile sideways once the bottom has transformed into worm-rich humus. Start a new pile right next to the old one. As food breaks down in the new pile, the worms will migrate laterally in massive numbers. You know, this technique was used historically by farmers who just didn't have the time to turn compost. They let worms do the travelling instead. The real power of this method, honestly, lies in how little labour it actually requires. Once you understand why worms prefer unturned compost, you stop trying to micromanage decomposition. You begin to trust the organisms that evolved to do this work long before humans ever tried to speed it up. Many gardeners, perhaps to their surprise, discover that their richest compost wasn't the pile they managed carefully, but the one they, neglected. Worm-driven composting makes that accidental success something you can recreate intentionally. This approach also works beautifully for gardeners who want quiet, low-maintenance systems. If you don't want to turn compost, don't have time, or maybe have mobility issues, the worm swarm method lets you create premium humus without constant effort. It's slow at first, but then, it accelerates dramatically once worm populations peak. In the end, unturned compost succeeds because it returns to a rhythm older than agriculture itself. Worms swarm to the bottom because that's where life concentrates when humans stop interfering. They are the final stage of natural decomposition, and when you allow them to work uninterrupted, they reward you with a soil amendment that is honestly richer, darker, and more nutrient-dense than most turnpiles ever achieve. If you enjoyed this deep dive into historical composting wisdom and practical soil science, go ahead and subscribe to Farm Logic and share this guide with others who want to work with nature instead of against it. There's a whole world of old-school techniques waiting to be rediscovered, and together we'll bring them back to life.